Boeing built the most advanced jet on Earth. It can't fly you anywhere. Picture this, the biggest twin-engine airliner ever made, with wings so wide they have to fold up just to fit at the gate. Engines the size of a small jet's whole fuselage. A machine that broke a world record before it ever carried a single paying passenger. And yet, 6 years after it was supposed to enter service, the Boeing 777X still isn't carrying anybody, not one ticketed traveler. Here's the number that should stop you cold. Boeing has burned through more than $15 billion on this program. $15 billion. And the meter is still running. So how does the most ambitious airplane Boeing ever designed become the symbol of everything going wrong inside the company? Stay with me. To understand the mess, you have to understand the dream. Go back to 2013. Boeing is on top of the world. The 787 Dreamliner is selling. The original 777 is a legend, one of the most profitable jets in history. So Boeing asks a simple question. What if we took that legend and made it bigger, longer, and far more efficient? That's the 777X, a stretched, modernized super twin built to swallow the market for giant long-haul jets, just as the four-engine monsters were dying off. The plan looked bulletproof. Enter service by 2020. Crush the competition, print money for the next 30 years. So what could possibly go wrong with a sure thing? Almost everything, it turns out. And the first crack showed up before the plane ever left the ground. Let's talk about why this plane is a genuine engineering marvel, because that's what makes the story so strange. Start with the wings. To fly efficiently, the 777X needs an enormous wingspan, 235 feet tip to tip. That's about 72 meters. That's wider than the wingspan of a 747 Jumbo. There's just one problem. No airport gate on Earth is built for a wing that wide. So Boeing did something no big airliner had ever done. The wingtips fold. The last 11 feet of each wing, roughly 3.5 meters, hinge straight up after landing. Think of it like folding the wing mirrors on your car to squeeze into a tight garage, except the mirror is the size of a small plane. It's brilliant, it's clean, and it was a regulatory nightmare waiting to happen. Now, the engines, and these are almost hard to believe. Each one is called the GE9X, and it is the largest jet engine ever bolted to a commercial aircraft. How big? The fan up front measures 134 inches across, more than 11 feet, nearly 3.5 meters. That's wide enough that the body of a 737 could almost slide through the front of it. Let that sink in. The engine is nearly as wide as an entire other airliner's cabin. And it's a record breaker. During testing, a single GE9X cranked out 134,000 pounds of thrust, enough to set a Guinness World Record for the most powerful commercial jet engine ever. So you've got record wings, a record engine, and the most modern systems Boeing knows how to build. On paper, this thing is unstoppable. So why has it spent more time in hangars than in the sky? Here's where the dream meets reality, and it's brutal. September 2019, Boeing rolls a 777X airframe into a test rig in Everett, Washington. This is the big one, the ultimate load test. They bend and stress the airframe far beyond anything a passenger flight would ever see, all the way to 1.5 times the maximum load. It's the test that proves the plane won't break apart in the worst possible moment. The pressure climbs, higher, higher, and then, at 1.48 times the limit, the fuselage explodes. The skin tears wide open just behind the wing. A passenger door blows clean off and slams into the factory floor. Now here's the cruel part. The plane failed at 99% of the target, 1% short. So close, and yet a catastrophic public failure. Boeing tried to keep the photos quiet. They leaked anyway. But a failed test you could survive. What you can't survive is timing. Because while the 777X was struggling, the rest of Boeing was on fire. Think back to what else was happening. Two 737 MAX jets had crashed, killing 346 people. The MAX was grounded worldwide. Investigators tore into how Boeing certified its planes, and what they found shook the entire system. The cozy relationship between Boeing and the FAA, where Boeing largely policed itself, was over. So picture the timing. Right as Boeing rolls up to certify its next big jet, the regulator decides it's done taking the company's word for anything. Every assumption, every shortcut, every trust us gets thrown out. The 777X didn't just inherit a tougher world. It inherited a regulator that no longer trusted its maker. And that changed everything. So what does distrust actually cost? Years. The FAA, burned by the MAX, demanded a far deeper, slower, more documented certification than Boeing ever planned for. Remember those clever folding wingtips? Regulators had to write brand new rules for a moving wing on a passenger jet because nothing like it existed. Every system got re-examined. Here's the part nobody tells you. A lot of the delay wasn't broken metal, it was paperwork, process, and proof. Boeing kept saying the plane was nearly ready. The FAA kept saying, prove it, again. The first flight finally happened in January 2020. A milestone, sure, but entry into service, the date that actually matters, kept sliding. 2020 became 2021, then 2023, then 2025. Each delay quieter and more expensive than the last. And then, just when it looked like the finish line was close, the plane broke again. August 2024. A test jet lands after a 5-hour flight back from Hawaii. During a routine inspection, engineers find something nobody wanted to see. A thrust link, the custom-built part that connects that giant GE9X engine to the wing, had cracked. Then they checked the other test planes. More cracks. Think about what that means. The single component holding one of the most powerful engines ever built to the airframe was failing in flight testing. Boeing grounded the entire test fleet on the spot. Flight stopped cold for roughly 4 months, while engineers redesigned and reinforced the part. 4 more months gone. And the question hanging over everyone got louder. When is this plane actually going to fly passengers? Now imagine you're the customer waiting on the other end of this. You're Emirates, the airline that bet its whole future on this jet, with hundreds of them on order. You were promised these planes years ago. You've rebuilt your fleet plans around them, again and again. And every year, Boeing comes back and says, just a little longer. Tim Clark, the man who runs Emirates, stopped being polite about it. He said he was, in his words, a little bit miffed to learn about the latest delay from the news instead of from Boeing directly. He told the plane makers to stop hiding behind excuses, snapping that they couldn't keep blaming the supply chain because, quote, you are the supply chain. And here's the twist. Even furious, even burned, Emirates didn't walk away. At the end of 2025, they ordered 65 more, pushing their total past 270 jets. Why on earth would you double down on a plane that keeps letting you down? Because for what they need, there's simply nothing else like it. So where does that leave the 777X? In late 2025, Boeing took another $4.9 billion charge and pushed the first delivery into 2027. Do the math. A plane meant to fly in 2020, now hoping for 2027. 7 years late, with the bill north of $15 billion and climbing. And the cruelest part? The engineering was never really the villain. The wings work. The record engine works. The fixes work. What broke wasn't the machine. It was trust, timing, and a company that promised the world right as the world stopped believing it. The 777X is a masterpiece, built in the wrong decade for its maker. Boeing didn't lose the plane. It lost the benefit of the doubt.
Pan Am was America. For 40 years, that blue globe on the tail meant power, glamour, the future itself. Presidents flew it. Movies were built around it. If you wanted to cross an ocean, you flew Pan Am. And then, on a December morning in 1991, it simply stopped. Every plane grounded. Every employee sent home. The most famous airline on Earth? Gone. Here's the part that should stop you cold. Pan Am didn't die in a fireball. No single crash ended it. It was killed slowly, by forces nobody saw coming. The same forces tearing through American skies right now. Because in May of 2026, another airline died overnight. 17,000 people lost their jobs in the middle of the night. And the story of how that happens, how a giant just disappears, starts decades earlier. Why do the airlines that seem too big to fail end up failing the hardest? Stay with me. Go back to the 1960s. Pan Am isn't just an airline, it's the unofficial flag of the United States in the sky. It flies to every continent. It orders the first Boeing 747s, betting the entire company on a plane so big nobody else dares to buy it. Its terminal in New York is a cathedral of glass. Pan Am is so powerful, it builds a 59-story skyscraper over Grand Central Station and puts its name on top in letters you can see for miles. Think about that, an airline with its own skyscraper in the middle of Manhattan. Its stewardesses are celebrities. Its routes circle the entire globe. To the average American, Pan Am doesn't just look unstoppable, it looks permanent. So what could possibly bring down something this big? It turns out the answer isn't a bomb, or a crash, or a war. It's a single piece of paper signed in Washington. And permanent things don't plan for the end. Then, in 1978, a single law changes everything. For decades, the government had controlled airline routes and prices. Carriers like Pan Am knew exactly where they could fly and what they could charge. It was safe, it was predictable. And then Washington tears the rulebook up. The Airline Deregulation Act throws the whole industry into open competition overnight. Suddenly, anyone can start an airline. Anyone can undercut your prices. Picture a town with one grocery store for 50 years, and one morning, 10 new stores open across the street, all of them cheaper. That's what hits the giants. And here's the cruel twist. Pan Am, the most international airline in the world, has almost no domestic routes inside America to fall back on. How do you fight a price war when you spent 40 years never having to? The thing that made it special is about to make it fragile. Pan Am is already bleeding money, selling off its best routes just to stay alive. It sells its Pacific routes. It sells its prized London routes. Each sale buys a little time and gives away a little more of its future. And then comes the night that breaks it. December 21st, 1988. Pan Am Flight 103, a Boeing 747, explodes over the small town of Lockerbie, Scotland. A terrorist bomb. 270 people die, including 11 on the ground who never left their homes. It's one of the worst attacks in aviation history. For a brand built entirely on trust and glamour, it's a wound that won't close. Lawsuits pour in. Passengers stay away. 3 years later, on December 4th, 1991, Pan Am flies its last flight. The airline that was America in the sky is finished. But it isn't the only giant dying that year. Because that very same year, another legend falls, and this one dies a completely different way. Eastern Airlines. 60 years old, once the third largest carrier in the country. But in 1986, Eastern is bought by a man named Frank Lorenzo, a corporate raider the unions come to hate. What follows is war. Lorenzo demands deep pay cuts. In 1989, he locks out the mechanics. The pilots and flight attendants walk out in solidarity. The airline grinds to a halt. Over the next few years, more than 45,000 Eastern employees lose their jobs. The government later declares Lorenzo unfit to run an airline at all. On January 19, 1991, Eastern shuts down for good. Pan Am was killed by the market. Eastern was killed from the inside. Two giants, same year, two completely different ways to die. So is there one thing that connects them? Hold that thought, because there's a third name coming, and it might be the saddest of all. And then there's the third name. Maybe the saddest of all. TWA. Trans World Airlines. For years, it was controlled by Howard Hughes himself, the billionaire who turned it into Pan Am's great rival across the Atlantic. TWA was Hollywood's airline, the one the movie stars flew. But by the 1990s, it's a ghost of itself, stumbling through bankruptcy after bankruptcy. It hangs on a decade longer than the others, kept alive by loyal employees and a famous name. And then, in 2001, American Airlines buys what's left of it for about $625 million. 173 planes, 18,000 workers, one of the proudest names in aviation, absorbed and erased. Within months, the TWA name vanishes from the tales forever. Three icons, Pan Am, Eastern, TWA, all gone inside 10 years. So what actually kills an airline? Here's what most people never understand. An airline is one of the most fragile big businesses on Earth. It looks solid, all that steel and concrete and thousands of employees, but underneath, it runs on razor-thin margins and mountains of debt. You think those tickets make a fortune? On a good year, an airline keeps just a few cents of profit on every dollar. And the planes? Most of them aren't even owned. They're leased, rented from finance companies. Fuel prices swing wildly. One recession, one spike in oil, one terrorist attack, and a company that looked invincible is suddenly burning cash it doesn't have. How does a business with hundreds of planes and millions of customers just run out of money? Faster than you'd ever believe. And when the money runs out, it runs out fast. There's no slow fade at the end. One week you're selling tickets, the next week the doors are locked. Which is exactly what the world watched happen, again, just last month. Because when an airline dies today, the collapse is brutal and instant. Think about everything that has to unravel in a single night. Where do 90 planes even go when the company that flew them ceases to exist? Planes scattered across dozens of airports, suddenly with nowhere to go. Leasing companies demanding their aircraft back immediately. Passengers stranded mid-trip, holding tickets for flights that no longer exist. Gates and landing slots that rival airlines are already circling like vultures. Loyalty points frozen. Refunds tangled in bankruptcy court for months. And thousands of employees who went to bed with a job and woke up without one. It isn't a business closing. It's a city vanishing overnight. And in May of 2026, Americans watched it happen in real time. Spirit Airlines, those bright yellow planes everyone loved to complain about. In the early hours of May 2nd, 2026, Spirit told its own passengers not to come to the airport. Every flight canceled, every counter closed. 17,000 employees found out they were losing their jobs in the middle of the night. 91 planes were left sitting at 26 airports across the country with nowhere to go. The government scrambled to arrange rescue fares on 9 other airlines just to get stranded travelers home. Some people chose to drive 10 hours rather than pay for a last-minute flight. Different decade, different name. But doesn't it sound familiar? If you've been paying attention, you've heard this story before. The same forces that took down Pan Am took down Spirit. Debt, competition, a margin too thin to survive one bad season. That's the thing nobody wants to admit about this business. There is no such thing as too big to fail. Pan Am had a skyscraper. Eastern had 60 years. TWA had Howard Hughes. Spirit had 170 planes. And all of them are gone or going, swallowed by the same quiet math. Every time you board a plane, you're trusting a company that could vanish before your return ticket. The names on the tails feel permanent. They never are. The sky doesn't remember who owned it. It just waits for the next one to fall.